Welcome back to the Paul Witwer Football Show. My name is Paul Witwer, and I am the host of this weekly podcast where I will cover the previous week's NFL games and look ahead to some important games in the coming week. This week's episode will look closer to what I want the show to be moving forward, and obviously it will change over more time and episodes. But with all of that being said, I will get straight into some important news in games from last week that need to be talked about. So, some quick news notes. TJ Watt, Steelers edge rusher TJ Watt, is going to be out for an extended period of time with a torn pec. They said that it was just partially torn, not a full tear. So, he's not going to be out a full season like that injury usually is. So, they did put him on the PUP, so he's going to be out at least 4 weeks, but they said that he could come back sooner as opposed to later. Another major injury, 49ers quarterback Trey Lance is going to be out for the year with a broken ankle. Broken bone and partially torn ligaments is what they're saying. It was compared a lot to Dak Prescott's injury, which I do not like for him. Obviously, that injury was major, was extreme. Dak had to go through 2 surgeries, and it took him a full season, I think a season and a half, to come back. So anytime that Prescott injury is brought up and compared to is never a good sign for that injury. But this does make Jimmy Garoppolo the starter again in San Francisco, and obviously we'll see how that goes moving forward. The team's probably going to look pretty similar to what it did in years past. So I think, again, the ceiling for this team is still making the Super Bowl. I just don't think that they have the capability of winning the Super Bowl, especially with how good the AFC is this season. More injury news. Dak Prescott injures his a bone in his thumb. They didn't end up placing him on IR, even though Jerry, immediately after the game, said that he would be out at least 6 weeks. Right now, after the scans and tests and everything, it's looking like he could potentially be back before 4 weeks, which is why they didn't place him on IR. That's kind of a tough injury to come back from as a quarterback. Obviously, you use your thumb to grip the football. It's very important. We saw Drew Brees struggle with that, but obviously Dak's younger, so maybe he can come back from this a little bit sooner. And also, I think Russell Wilson struggled with this last season as well, so we'll see if Dak Prescott can kind of have a similar timeline to those 2 players or if it'll take longer. Some other important news, because Joe Flacco currently leads the NFL in passing yards. Looks like we're going back to 2011, 2012. Joe Flacco standing in for Zach Wilson in the New York Jets. Never a good sign when you have a veteran and a young quarterback who needs to get as many reps as possible in the offense for the team to have confidence in him, and his backup is playing so much better than he is. He has over 600 yards passing, and also kind of in the twilight zone here a little bit, Tua, the Miami quarterback, is in second. So there's a lot of weird, bizarro world things happening right now in the NFL, especially when it comes to quarterbacks. Obviously, Joe hasn't been a starter in a long time, and Tua's in a new offense, and that is really weird to see those 2 players lead the NFL in passing. Next, I want to dive into some surprising things and disappointing things from this season in the past 2 weeks, obviously the first 2 weeks of football. So a surprising thing I saw, or a surprising team, is the Miami Dolphins. The first week, when they beat the Patriots 20-7. That was a pretty average game, I thought, from the team, kind of what I expected from them. A lot of what I saw from them last season in terms of efficiency and kind of what Tua is, in terms of production, I should say, is kind of typical of what I thought. The offense looks a lot different, which is nice. It's not just RPO after RPO. In that first week, they only ran 2 RPOs, but Tua, I think getting him on rollouts, I thought that they executed play action very well from the shotgun. So that was really encouraging. In that game, he was only 8.2 yards per attempt, and the longest play of the day was 42 yards. That's pretty average for a Tua game up until that point, so I wasn't too shocked with that. And Tyreek Hill, I think, getting 12 targets in this offense kind of explains why he was so high on Tua coming in to the season, preseason, just hyping him up, calling him the most accurate quarterback he's ever played with. Obviously, I don't think that's a direct shot at Patrick Mahomes. He's just trying to hype up his own guy, but still kind of a weird thing to say, especially when Patrick Mahomes is one of the best quarterbacks ever, and they had a really prolific offense. In week 2, however, they beat Baltimore in Baltimore, and they were down 21 points in the fourth quarter, and they had only scored 7 points through the first half. I think this game is going to go down currently as Tua's best game ever. I think he had 461 yards and then just jumped up to 9.2 yards per attempt and had 6 touchdowns. It was by far Tua's best game of his career. They, in that second, especially that fourth quarter and second half, they kind of got whatever they wanted. They were throwing the ball down the field. They hit Tyreek on a long touchdown throw, and then with a couple seconds left in the game, he hit Jalen Waddle for the touchdown to seal the game. There's still some time left for potentially a Baltimore touchdown if there was, if they got to Hail Mary position. But yeah, I think this, if you're a Miami Dolphins fan, this is a super encouraging sign to see. Obviously, the offense being different, and then the fact that these receivers can just get down the field so fast. Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, Cedric Wilson, all of those guys are extremely fast receivers, and I'm really shocked with how easily they are able to get the ball down the field. Another surprising team, Philadelphia Eagles. The first game against the Lions was a little concerning, to say the least, because it on the defensive side, not the offensive side. The offense was great, and they scored a ton of points, but defense gave up that many points to the Lions. Again, it's week 1 overreactions. Lions have been awful, pretty inept for as long as I can remember. And so for them to kind of barely beat the Lions in this kind of shootout type game was a little bit concerning. But then they come in week 2 and they just dismantle the Minnesota Vikings, who easily beat the Packers in week 1, who I think, along with myself and a lot of other people, thought would win the NFC North. And they easily beat the Packers, had a ton of pressure, really didn't let the Packers get into the end zone or move the ball very efficiently. And then to all of a sudden just completely limit Justin Jefferson, and then Jalen Hurts to kind of silence all the naysayers with his 83.9% completion percentage and his 10.4 yards per attempt against zone, which is something that he struggled with a lot last season. So to see him come in, do really well against zone, have his 2 rushing TDs, and then to also see the defense completely shut down the Vikings offense. Darius Slay had 2 interceptions, and they forced Kirk into 3 interceptions. The 2 Slay interceptions were just pretty awful throws by Kirk Cousins and bad decisions. But I think Slay just had Jefferson's number that day, and he kind of ran a lot of the routes for Justin Jefferson and just kind of bullied him off of his spot and just kind of took the ball. Justin Jefferson ended up with 6 receptions on 12 targets for 48 yards. Obviously, a far cry from his 188-yard performance in Week 1. So to see the Vikings, I had them winning this division in my preseason predictions, but I did not see them winning this many games like this early on. So now we're going to go into 2 disappointing teams. And this one hurts me quite a bit because these 2 teams I had really high hopes for. I had them both being division winners by the end of the season, both of them finishing with 12-5 records. And obviously that's not going to happen. I don't think I looked into the weaknesses of these 2 teams as much as I probably should have. But the Indianapolis Colts will start off with first. They're currently 0. They're 0-1-1. They tied the Houston Texans in Week 1. Obviously, that's really concerning. Houston's they're trying to lose games. I mean, they want to be competitive, obviously, as players and coaches, but the front office is clearly trying to lose as many games as possible, get a high draft pick, as many high draft picks as possible, and they're in a clear rebuild. So to tie them in Week 1 is not good. And then in Week 2, another division game against a team that you should clearly be better than because they have a brand new coaching staff, a young quarterback, a lot of new weapons on offense, and the defense is relatively young. And then they got shut out completely. They lost 24-0 to the Jacksonville Jaguars. They looked completely inept on offense. Matt Ryan couldn't do anything. He threw 3 interceptions, no touchdowns. He looks old. He looks like Phillip Rivers did, except Phillip Rivers had an amazing offensive line to sit behind and tons of weapons. This team does not. This offensive line outside of Quentin Nelson is awful. I mean, they've got Braden Smith starting at right tackle. He's been awful. Pinter at right guard. Pryor at left tackle. They've been terrible. The only 2 players who have been relatively okay is Quentin Nelson, who still hasn't really looked like himself since his injury. And then Ryan Kelly, who's been okay for them as well. But Matt Ryan is constantly under pressure, and he looks terrified and old. His arm looks weak, and they didn't have Pittman for this game, who seems to be their only capable offensive weapon outside of Jonathan Taylor, obviously. But as a defense, and Jacksonville kind of did this, when all you have to worry about is Jonathan Taylor and no one can win on the outside, then you're at an advantage. Then, of course, on the defensive side, Gus Bradley's system is just, I don't know why teams continue to hire Gus Bradley and assume that he's going to change anything that he does. He's going to make any type of adjustment. All he does is play cover 3, and he puts these corners on islands, and their 2 corners, Kenny Moore and Stephon Gilmore, do not look like the players, especially Stephon Gilmore does not look like the player he used to. And then they've got Yannick Ngakoue as their edge rusher, their premier edge rusher, obviously trying to bring Kwity Paye along. He's still a young player in his 2nd year. So it's really looking bad for the Colts. And then the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals I'm a little less concerned about, but still there's some concern. A lot of those things I thought they could overcome as a team, they haven't been able to. The luck that would fall their way like it did last season. Those low percentage plays I was talking about, throwing down the field near the boundary and things like that. It's just not going their way this season. That first game against the Steelers where they lost in overtime, Evan McPherson missing field goals to win the game, the Jamar Chase touchdown that wasn't ruled a touchdown. And it's just those things last season went their way, and which is why they won as many games as they did. And this year, it's swung in the complete opposite direction. I did not think it would swing that drastically for them. I thought it would kind of come back to the mean, but I thought they were and their schedule wasn't that difficult, I thought. So I thought they could, especially early here against the Steelers and the Cowboys, I really thought that they could come out and kind of establish what they do well, and the defense could play well. Also, Joe Burrow's got 5 interceptions and 13 sacks after 2 games and is on pace for more than 100 sacks this season. That's not something you want to see when you bring in a bunch of players and offensive linemen who are veterans and who are supposed to make this offensive line better. So you can, 1, protect Joe Burrow better, and 2, run the ball better. 2 of those things they haven't been able to do so far. So we'll see. Offensive line is a lot about chemistry, playing together. Maybe by the end of the season, they'll look a little bit better, but their next game is a must-win. They have to beat the Jets in New York. And the Jets are a little bit feisty right now. They just got off of that comeback win against the Cleveland Browns. So the Bengals have got to beat the Jets. It is a must-win game for them. They cannot go 0-3 because the rest of their schedule gets more difficult. So for this next segment, I want to take a deep dive into a game that I thought was really, really exciting and interesting in week 2. Obviously, I'm going to be doing this every week as opposed to just doing weeks 1 and 2 in one episode. Next week will just be me talking about week 3. I'll maybe be able to do 2 games, but for right now, we're just going to do 1 game. And that game is, I kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, was the Miami Dolphins at the Baltimore Ravens. So the score ended up being 42-38. And first, I kind of want to start with the Miami offense. So Mike McDaniel, I think, is making a case, an early case, really, really early premature case for Coach of the Year. What he's been able to do with Tua and the offense has been really surprising. I think that bringing in Tyreek Hill obviously is going to help stretch the field, but they're doing it both horizontally and vertically out of the shotgun, which is insane because play action normally works best when you turn your back to the defense from under shotgun and you run play action there. Kyle Shanahan's done it a million times. Obviously, his offense is predicated on that. They do it a little bit in Green Bay as well, and a little less with Sean, but turning your back to the defense and then really hard faking. What the Dolphins and Mike McDaniel have been able to do is do that out of shotgun. And a ton of other coaches have tried it, and it hasn't really worked with other quarterbacks. For some reason, it's really working with the Dolphins. Maybe that's just because of people's preconception that really they're just going to run RPOs and do that. But obviously, this offense has been way different. They've been rolling Tua out, lots of quick 1-step, 3-step drops, kind of get the ball out of his hands. But the difference between this offense doing that and other offenses is because their wide receivers are so fast, their running backs, even Raheem Mostert is really fast. Chase Edmonds all these guys, Cedric Wilson, all these guys can, and then also Mike Gesicki, one of the faster tight ends. All these guys can get down the field so much faster than other players. Those, 3-step drops, and then you expect the player to be at 10 yards. Those guys are 15 yards down the field. So it's an extra 5 yards for those quote unquote quick passes, 1-step, 3-step drops. The only concern I have about this team and this offense is the running game. They weren't really able to get it going too much against Baltimore, and that's just because they got behind so early. But even in that first game against the New England Patriots, the line does not block very well for running the football. They even, I like Raheem Mostert a lot as a running back, and I think the 49ers are really missing him right now with all the injuries they've suffered at that position. And now they're starting Jeff Wilson Jr. But coming back now to the Dolphins, they can't really get Raheem Mostert going. They can't really get Chase Edmonds going. So we'll see when teams kind of figure out how to play this offense a little bit better, keep Tua from even making quick passes or keep these receivers from getting so far down the field. But, in that second half, when Baltimore's defense was hurt, they really were just able to kind of go bombs away and throw it down the field. It was definitely Tua's best game of his career. Like I mentioned before, he had 36 completions on 50 attempts for a 72% completion percentage. The 72% completion percentage is kind of what I expect from Tua, but the 6 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, average depth of target was 7.8 yards, at over 600 yards passing. That is obviously not what you expect from Tua. You expect that average depth of target to be much lower, lots of behind the scrimmage sort of screen passes, get the ball into the hands of your playmakers and kind of let them do a lot of the work. This, especially in the second half, was a lot of throwing the ball down the field, really being aggressive. And that is amazing to see from this offense this early. I do think, though, Tua does struggle to throw a lot of routes that I think are really important, that will be really important in this offense, like deep digs and kind of comeback routes. His first pick that he threw in the first quarter was kind of on a deep in, on a comeback route, and he just threw it late and kind of towards the safety who was crashing in, and kind of read the play really well. So if that ball comes out earlier and on time, I think that's obviously a big completion. And I saw some other plays kind of later in the game where he's just missing these comeback routes and these deep digs and things like that. So in order for this offense to be successful, they can't just be running goes, posts, things like that. They have to have those comeback routes. They have to have a counter. And if Tua is not going to pull the trigger on those when he's supposed to, then that is a little bit concerning for them moving forward. Kind of moving now over to the Baltimore offense. I think Lamar Jackson and Greg Roman responded exactly how they needed to against this Miami defense that gave them so many problems last year. It was one of Lamar's worst games of his career in that game against the Dolphins in 2021. All they did was blitz him all game long, and they had no response except for weird wide receiver screens that didn't really work. And this game was much different. When Lamar Jackson was under pressure, I think that he performed really, really well, especially over the middle of the field. When he was blitzed, he was 13 of 16 for 213 yards with a 13.3 yards per attempt and 2 touchdowns. And it's really nice to see Rashad Bateman taking advantage of those one-on-one matchups. He's up against Xavier Howard, who's one of the better cover corners in the NFL, and he's beating him one-on-one. Again, granted, during the blitz, no help, but for him to do that this early on, for them to respond the way they did, was really encouraging to see. I would have liked to see them kind of continue that in the second half. I think they slowed down a little bit in the second half, which is something I'm concerned about. Outside of Lamar Jackson, their running game is not successful at all. They're missing J.K. Dobbins mightily. It is just Lamar Jackson, who had over 100 yards rushing and also, had over 300 yards passing, 318 yards. So that's a lot on Lamar's plate. That's nothing new, but it's even more without the help of J.K. Dobbins and some other type of running presence. And I think the biggest question moving forward for Baltimore is how their new defensive coordinator, Mike McDonald, and the Baltimore defense respond, because they absolutely fell apart in the second half. There's no other way to put it. Miami was down 21 points, and they gave up 28 points in the fourth quarter, which is just something you can't do. I get it that you're up against a new offense and they've got a ton of speed, and they also suffered some injuries in the secondary. But, you have players, the deep touchdown pass to Tyreek, both Kyle Hamilton and Marcus Williams, for instance, they both played the strong safety role. So they're both doing the same exact thing, and no one's able to give that corner help, because the corner was clearly expecting some safety help because he let Tyreek Hill run directly past him. So for them to have this many communication errors is really troubling to see. And to have, Marcus Peters not be 100% back yet, and then Marlon Humphrey being hurt. Obviously you've got rookies in there and backups playing both corner spots. That's not good. And I think that definitely would have helped them, and something that Tua struggles with is pressure. But instead of pressuring Tua, they would simulate like they're going to pressure and then drop back into put 8 people into coverage. I think on the last touchdown, they act like they're going to simulate pressure, and then like they've been doing all game. So they crowd the line of scrimmage, and then they drop 8 back into coverage, and you give Tua time, and he puts the ball only where Jalen Waddle can catch it. And then I think on the earlier touchdown to Mike Gesicki, they rush 2 people, drop 9 back, and Tua just throws it high, only where Mike Gesicki can catch it right there, kind of by the goal post. And it's just not the book on Tua. If you want to beat Tua, you have to get pressure in his face. For instance, that first interception Tua threw on the comeback, the reason that was late and off target was because they actually got pressure on him up the middle. They had a rusher coming in on him, and he panicked and he threw it inaccurately. That's how you beat Tua. So for them to just not do that and just continually get beat by simulating pressure and then having the miscommunication on the back end, there's no point in dropping 8 if 2 people play the same position when they're not supposed to be. So that was really concerning to see. And Miami's defense, they brought pressure, but those corners are really struggling right now. And for them to really not have too much of a counterpunch there, really what happened was Baltimore just kind of ran out of gas there at the end of that game, and Miami was able to kind of capitalize on that. So it is concerning. Obviously, you don't want to, as a defense, give up that many points. And they're just lucky that the Ravens got really hurt. But still, really interesting game, really crazy game. It was really awesome to see the Tua and Mike McDaniel offense working beautifully there in the second half. And it was awesome to see Lamar Jackson play well again. So he's going to get a massive paycheck coming into next season. So for our last segment of the podcast, I'm just going to talk about some games that I'm looking forward to seeing, some exciting games. And first, I'm going to start out with the Raiders and Titans. It's exciting, not in the way that a lot of people want it to be exciting. Obviously, both of these teams are 0-2 and kind of struggling, but both of these teams have playoff aspirations. And I think if either one of them misses the playoffs, especially Tennessee, if Tennessee misses the playoffs in that division where the Colts look abysmal and really your only competition at this point is the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are really young, if they don't make the playoffs, if they can't win that division, there are going to be major changes, especially with Ryan Tannehill. So this is definitely a must-win game for this team because, to lose to the Giants in week 1 and to get blown out by Buffalo, that's pretty expected. But then, this is kind of a must-win. You really don't want to fall in that 0-3 hole. I don't think either team can really afford it, especially with Las Vegas and the division that they're in. And then Tennessee, it's really difficult to fall to 0-3. So both of these teams are really going to be, I think, giving it their best shot. I think both teams are of equal kind of caliber of talent. I just think that my money's going to be on Las Vegas because I think the offense is just clicking a little bit better than Tennessee's. Obviously, when you lose A.J. Brown and just try to replace him with a rookie, there's going to be some humps and bumps. But just to have Derrick Henry kind of only be okay, not really be able to establish the run too well, and Ryan Tannehill not playing that great, my money I would probably put on the Las Vegas Raiders to cover and also win. Another game I'm excited about, America's Game of the Week, Packers-Buccaneers. Can the Packers finally get over their Florida and Buccaneers hump? The Packers play awful, and Aaron Rodgers specifically plays awful in Florida. And the Buccaneers are one of the most banged up teams in the NFL. Their interior offensive line, their wide receivers are really struggling. Obviously, when Mike Evans is going to be suspended, like, who are you relying on? Past that, with hurt Julio Jones, it's looking like he will play, but again, he's old and hurt often. And then Chris Godwin's now struggling with a hamstring injury. So when you've got kind of those two things going against them, they're going to be trotting out Scotty Miller, Russell Gage. Will they be able to move the ball against the Packers? And will the Packers be able to move the ball against one of the better defenses in the NFL without Devontae Adams, obviously? And I think the Buccaneers right now have the second ranked defense in the NFL on many major rankings. So that'll be an interesting matchup. And then obviously when you have Tom Brady versus Aaron Rodgers, there's a huge appeal to that game as well. Two of the best quarterbacks ever. It'll be really exciting to see if that game can if both teams can kind of figure out a way to move the ball, or if it's just going to be a defensive slugfest that ends 9-3 or something. Right now, I'm going to bet on the Buccaneers just because until I see the Packers beat Tampa Bay with Tom Brady, I'm not going to pick them to do it. So right now I'm going to pick Tampa Bay. And then the other exciting game is the 49ers and the Broncos. Both teams are 1-1. Obviously, you've got Jimmy Garoppolo now coming in for Trey Lance. What will the offense look like? Will it still kind of look like what it did last week, where it was there were two deep throws to the outside of the field, which Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't do. That was kind of carried over from what they were working with Trey Lance. Will they continue to try to do some things like that? I doubt it. It's probably going to go exactly back to what they've been running the past however many years they've had. I think 4 years now they've had Jimmy Garoppolo as their starting quarterback. So, and then what will the Broncos look like now? I mean, are they going to be able to get out of their own way against good teams? They played Seattle and Houston, two of probably the least talented teams in the NFL, two teams who are trying, front offices who are trying to lose games. Obviously, like I said before, coaches and players don't want to lose games, but front offices do. Will the Broncos actually be able to beat a competent team? And then, is this a must-win for the Broncos? Another kind of team who I was disappointed in. I had them going 11-6. Obviously, coming out losing at Seattle, attempting the league record for the longest outdoor field goal to win a football game when you have Russell Wilson against an objectively not good team is embarrassing. And then, they're playing in Denver and their clock management is so bad that the crowd is actively counting down the play clock for them so they can just get the ball snapped on time. Really difficult to see that from Nathaniel Hackett, who I thought was a good coordinator with the Packers, and I liked how he called plays and ran the offense in Jacksonville with Blake Bortles. I really thought that they would kind of get off to a faster start than this. So it's difficult to see him struggling with those things and struggle with Russell Wilson. And that's going to be it. Thank you all for listening to the third episode of the Paul Witwer Football Show. Again, this episode is a little weird to what the normal episodes will look like because I am covering 2 weeks of games and news instead of 1 week. So next week, stay tuned. That will drop in the middle of the week. I'm going to drop those on either Tuesday or Wednesday from now on instead of Thursday. And as always, please like, comment, and subscribe if you like the podcast. And don't forget to visit thepaulstopshere.com for more content like this.